Are you all ready?
Yeah, I think we'll get going. Right, we've got a few bound there'll be a few more people join as we get going, but let's get started. So welcome everybody. I'm Paul Heaton, and we've got George Koski with us. Our contact details are there and at the end of the presentation as well. We'll be talking to you today about Windows 365. Can you just jump to the next slide? Just a reminder, this is a discussion format. We keep these nice and short, just 45 minutes before your lunch break. But the whole idea is to ask questions, right? So either post them in the chat there or stick your hand up and we'll just keep talking about it. And we'll see if we can answer your questions as we go along. We are recording the session as well, everybody, so this will be available on our website afterwards. So usually take a day or two just to edit that and clean things up, and then we'll stick it up there so you can refer back to this or pass that on to colleagues, please do. But today, slight diversion. So this has been a series of sessions, 9 sessions now, but we've predominantly focused on Azure Virtual Desktop, which I'll explain in a second. Today, a little shift, and we're talking about Windows 365. Obviously, Microsoft now have 2 VDI solutions. And we'll do a little bit of a comparison for them later on, but mainly we'll talk about Windows 365, its deployment processes, where you might use it, and then George is going to give you some demos, particularly around like what's the experience for the end user, and for us as IT professionals, what does that look like in the admin portal. Then of course we'll just double check at the end that you've got all your questions addressed. So Microsoft, what are they doing? Why have they got 2 VDI solutions? Well, when it comes to Azure Virtual Desktop, you could think of that as more of a traditional VDI solution, even though it's in the cloud rather than on-prem. And that means that it can publish applications, it can do pooled or what we might call multi-session, and it can also do individual PCs, right? Much like what Windows 365 does. So that is analogous to what we're probably used to in RDS farms or Citrix farms on-prem, but we've moved it up to the cloud, and the cloud allows us, as you've seen from all our other sessions, it allows us to tackle things in much more interesting ways. It means we don't have to have that large investment in infrastructure up front, and it means we can scale out rather than up, right? And what I mean by that is we can keep adding VMs, small VMs for users, rather than trying to put some big compute together and trying to manage those on-prem resources, right? So that's Azure Virtual Desktop. And we know and love that, and I think it's a very powerful solution. But what's Windows 365 all about? Well, maybe you just flick to the next slide for me, George. Maybe we can use Satya's description. What Microsoft did when they announced Windows 365, they really focused on it being a cloud PC, and I really want to stop and think about what that means. A cloud PC is exactly like the laptop that you're probably watching this session on in front of you. We manage it and control it in the same way, and it is designed to be used by an individual. So it's a one-to-one session. We don't have multi-session, and we don't publish applications from it. Right? What we do is have a cloud PC up there that is allows us to manage it in the same way that we manage the rest of our PC fleet. So if you're using Intune or SCCM, we can use those things to manage that PC up there, and we need to think of it like that because we need to secure it in the same way that we look at our laptops. The only difference is that we don't have that piece of hardware that you've got in front of you. That is now replaced by the cloud, right? And some of the differences we'll see as well is the amount of administration and control that we get as IT professionals, right?
I think another key selling point there as well, Paul, is that the underlying hardware is no longer an issue at the moment, right? So people are using or repurposing old laptops, things like that, to get a better experience up in the cloud or tablets or whatever the case is.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all the different ways you can connect to Windows 365 and how you can leverage all those old assets and bring them up and use the different types of compute that you can get for Windows 365 and change the sizes depending on what you're doing during the month, right? Maybe you need a more powerful machine for some users while they run their end of month processes, and then you can downsize it again to something smaller that's cheaper. But one of the things I think I really want to drill home, and I heard this on a presentation recently, so it's not my terminology, but I think one of the best ways to talk about Windows 365 for us as IT professionals and what it means when you do, and when you're going to go through the rest of the presentation with George and we look at the technical things, is what Windows 365 actually is a virtual desktop, but without the infrastructure, right? So we no longer need to manage the infrastructure, right? That means we don't need to worry about compute and storage and graphics and all those other PCs. We just pick the size of VM that we want, and then Microsoft provision it, and they look after the back end. Right, we don't need to worry about that. What that means to our businesses is for a set monthly fee, we can predict what it's going to cost us, and we can reduce the IT admin overhead, right? Which I think is one of the biggest selling points with Windows 365. But with that short introduction I might hand over to George, who can get into a bit more of the technical details. But just a reminder, please do ask questions along the way, and I'll chip in as well and prompt George to think about things a bit differently as we go. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, guys, feel free to stop me at any point during this. It is a discussion series, so if you have questions, just pipe in. I'm happy to answer them. So cool. What is Windows 365? So as Paul mentions, Windows 365 is basically your personal laptop in the cloud. You'll hear Cloud PC or Windows 365. They're pretty much the same thing. Microsoft are marketing it as sort of your Cloud PC in the cloud. So just keep that in mind. You'll hear that throughout the presentation. So it's basically a desktop as a service, right? You're streaming a PC that's running in the cloud, managed by Microsoft's backend servers. You don't need to worry about what your endpoint is. You can be a tablet, you can be a laptop, a web browser, whatever the case is, knowing that your Cloud PC is always online, always running in the background, and available for you to access wherever you are in the world. It's basically a fixed rate cost. So depending on what size and hardware you want for your Cloud PC, it does come at a fixed rate cost, meaning that you can leave it running 24/7. And users can have multiple Cloud PCs. So you can basically provision a really small SKU for your general office worker, and then go up to a sort of a larger SKU, sort of when needed, and assign that to a user as well, and give them the ability to chop and change between the two, or just have them both running, right? Whatever your use case is. But in terms of sort of what that gives to our users, users have the ability to, I guess, shut down, restart, troubleshoot, rename, restore, and even reset their own devices. So we're sort of offloading a lot of the administrative tasks that IT usually perform, and we're giving that ability to the end users. So this is going to lead to less calls to the service desk. My PC is not working, that kind of thing. People generally can go in and perform those tasks by themselves via the portal. As soon as you assign a license or a Windows 365 license to a user, and you have all the policies and things like that in place in the background, there's an automated service that will provision a Cloud PC for that user, and they can expect that machine to be ready within 45 minutes of the initial deployment. You can also assign, different business licenses to different users. You can give them enterprise, you can give them business, you can give them a higher SKU or lower SKU, all that kind of stuff, and it's all visible to the end user in the portal. The Windows 365 comes in two flavors, business and enterprise. Business is typically for those small to medium businesses, where you up to 300 users, I guess, is sort of a max where you can spin up 300 machines. But enterprise is definitely for those large organizations who wish to have full control over the users' Cloud PCs. Some of the key differences here between the two are obviously enterprise is unlimited. You can provision an unlimited number of virtual machines for your users. You can use custom images in enterprise. Enterprise supports domain join and MDM policies. You can also grant users local admin if you like. By default, it's on for business users and off for enterprise users. And AVD insights can now show up as well for your Cloud PC. So you have sort of that whole back-end monitoring around what your users are doing, any troubleshooting, connection issues, that kind of thing. You've got sort of full visibility around that in both editions. Probably be focusing more around Windows 365 Enterprise for this one, just because we're probably all large business users. But what business sort of offers is there on the left-hand side, and the enterprise sort of SKU is on the right-hand side. So you can obviously see enterprise has got more features, more things that your users can do, more things that your admins can do. You've got things like custom images where you can create a custom Windows 10, Windows 11 SOE, include all the applications, etc., that you need, for the user to be business ready when that VM spins up. You can also, you've got the ability for image management, so like compute gallery, where you've got multi-region images. If you're deploying to more than one region, you can replicate those images out and basically have them ready to be provisioned in those regions. And then you've also got connection to on-prem resources, right? So with enterprise, the machines can be domain joined. They have access to on-prem resources, printers, file shares, all that sort of stuff. So there's some of the key differences between the two editions. So technically,
just on that, like comparing the two there, it sounds like Windows 365 Business is a little bit like popping down to Harvey Norman or JB Hi-Fi and picking up a laptop, right, and then handing it out to somebody, and it is that type of experience, right? Whereas the enterprise, obviously, we as IT professionals want to control the SOE. We want to make sure we've got the right apps on there, policies in place, and all that type of thing.
Absolutely.
Not that they're impossible with business, but it's sort of much more control through the enterprise. Right?
Yeah. Look, in the lab later on in the demo, I've got access to both SKUs, and I can show you the differences between the two and what it looks like to the IT admin. But basically, you're right. The business edition, once you deploy, you have no visibility over it. You can only assign and unassign licenses, and then it's sort of offloaded to the user where they want to, reset their device or shut it down, power it on, that kind of stuff. But enterprise gives you that overarching manageability across all your devices.
You still, with business though, we still get the ability to use Intune to manage them, right? But you need to be a cloud-based one because there's not that connectivity piece that you're going to describe for enterprise, right?
Yeah. I'll go through all of that in the next few slides, definitely.
Sorry, George, just from a UX perspective, so with business, does the user still have the ability to connect to and use local resources on their own network? So
No.
not from a domain perspective, just like printing and USB devices and that sort of stuff?
No. So in a couple of slides, I'll show you an example of sort of how it's, I guess, with the business edition, you're deploying it into the cloud. You don't really have manageability around what it can and can't do in terms of network connectivity because you don't see the network interface card. You can't sort of configure any routing policies or anything like that. You can with the enterprise one. And our friends at Nerdio have basically got a really nice diagram that explains where that NIC is and how you can sort of manage network traffic and that kind of stuff. But to answer your question, no, it can't really access on-prem stuff. So it's more of like if you're using SaaS-based applications in the cloud, that's where business will sort of fit in a lot better for your scenario. But yeah,
but you wouldn't be able to print.
Well, it depends if it was a SaaS offering, Dom.
Yeah.
So if you were printing like on a I don't know, using universal print and a SaaS-based solution, then yes. But I think what you're all thinking about, and knowing you and your environment, the answer would be no, right? Because you wouldn't be able to get to the network.
Oh no, I'm not even thinking of the environment here.
Oh, you were thinking
just thinking broadly in terms of the offering. So why would you go business over enterprise, even as a small business, for example?
It's probably more the cost base and licensing part, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely comes down to cost. Now, if you're thinking printing, like local printing, if you're at home, yes, it does print a redirection. But if you want to do something, within an organization, you want to connect to a network printer, then no, you can't do that with business.
Okay, so you could print to a local wireless printer or network, not network, or physically connected printer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so some of the technical and license requirements that you basically need for these cloud PCs to work. So users must have a license for Windows, Intune, Azure AD, and Windows 365 to use the cloud PC. In terms of network connectivity, so if you're doing hybrid Azure AD join, like the enterprise SKU, you need at least that one virtual network configured. You also need that VNet to have line of sight to your domain controller because it has to domain join to something, if that's the route you want to do. You can also do hybrid Azure AD join or domain join, or you've got Azure Active Directory join, right? So 100% cloud only. For user identity, you've got hybrid users, so Azure Active Directory AD Connect, syncing your users up from on-prem, or you've got Azure AD cloud only that can basically use that to assign users to cloud PCs. So if you're running a 100% cloud environment. For image you've got the marketplace images, so custom images, marketplace images or your custom images that you can sort of BYOD in Azure, and you've got full manageability around that, using Azure Compute Gallery to distribute those images across different regions. In terms of management, you can use Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Intune. If you're doing the enterprise SKU, you basically got that VNet, the NIC injected inside your VNet, so you've got full manageability of that device. So you can continue to use whatever tools you're using on-prem. You do have line of sight to that VM, and it is on your network. And in terms of admin permissions, M365 Intune Service Admin role, Intune Administrator role, Azure Subscription Owner. This is all for the initial setup, ongoing maintenance and things like that. You've got Windows 365 admin roles that you can assign to your users to restrict them further so that they can only see those Cloud PCs. So what is a typical deployment process for, I guess, an enterprise edition user? So again, you need a Azure subscription. You need to determine how you want to configure your Active Directory, whether it's going to be hybrid or full cloud only. You need to have Windows 365 licenses assigned to a group or to your users. And depending on what license you get, the license are actually named as the SKU. So Microsoft resells these as, like a 2 CPU, 8 GB RAM machine, which will cost you X amount a month. And as soon as you assign that to a group or to a user, it'll start provisioning those VMs in the background for you. There's a workflow that kicks off, and I'll show you that in the demo. You also need all your associated Azure resources, in whatever region you're going to be deploying set up. So your VNet and any custom images that you want to use, and then the credentials to log in for the end users to log in, and also the administrative users to manage that environment. Some more network requirements here. So when going down the route of the enterprise SKU, you obviously need connectivity into Azure, whether that's via an express route or a site-to-site VPN. If you don't have any of them, you need to set them up and think about how your users are going to be accessing your domain control, your on-prem resources, all that kind of stuff. The Azure VNet needs to have a route to the DNS server so that when VMs are domain joined, they can contact your domain controller. Your on-prem Active Directory must be in sync with Azure AD, and then the VMs are joined to Active Directory and then basically synced up via that Azure AD Connect Sync tool to turn them into hybrid Azure AD joined machines.
So George, this is probably the main area, right? Sorry, to me, the network. When we're talking about those enterprise deployments and we want to consume that corporate network resources, right? Setting up the network is probably the main thing we have to think about with Windows 365. Unlike AVD or other solutions with VDI, where we need to think about compute and think about storage and other things, with Windows 365, that's predominantly taken care of by Microsoft. They look after nearly everything except that connection into our corporate environment, and we achieve that by going via Azure, right? So we connect to your Azure environment, and that gives you access to the rest of your corporate network.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously with Azure VNets and things like that, you've got different routing, you've got firewalls in place, you've got all of these sort of components that you would have in your organization at the moment. And then if you want to look at incorporating Windows 365 into that, those machines still need to, I guess, phone home to the Windows 365 portal and say, hey, I'm available to the broker, right? Because you're not opening RDP ports or anything like that to those VMs. You're actually tunneling through them via the Windows 365 brokering service itself. So yes, you can control routing and policies and things like that, but you also need to have those virtual machines accessible to certain URLs, or at least have them phone home to the certain URLs so that the service knows that those machines are available and it can manage them, etc.
Which I think for some of our larger enterprise clients, wrapping their heads around that from a cybersecurity point of view and an ownership point of view, it's great that we don't have to look after the infrastructure. Microsoft are doing that for us, but conversely, it's like, well, who's holding the baby, right? And who's looking after that? So it's very important that we understand that Microsoft look after all that storage and compute area, and they just inject. So the VM that we're using under the hood, the VM we're using for Windows 365, we just inject in the NIC, right? And just the network card off that VM is then exposed to us for us to manage, right? And it's sort of wrapping their heads around all those differences, right, of ownership and responsibilities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just one thing to know. I mean, if you were to go down the business SKU, you don't see anything in terms of the VM, the NIC, or anything like that anywhere in the Azure portal. So that's hosted in the Microsoft 365 portal, whereas the enterprise SKU, the only thing that we see as IT admins is the VNet inside our Azure subscription. We don't see the disk or the actual VM itself. So I'll show you that later on. But yeah, you just see that the VNet, the NIC injected into the VNet, and whatever policies, routing policies, that kind of stuff happen on that VNet will still apply to those enterprise SKU VMs. On the topic of networking, so I mean, as with everything in Azure, yes, you will pay your sort of fixed price for the licensing around Windows 365, but there is also an outbound cost of sort of your bandwidth, right? So first 5 gigs free, anything after that is obviously charged at those numbers there. So something to keep in mind if you have sort of high, heavy users, you know, uploading things, etc.
That's only outbound, right? So
Correct.
most users probably wouldn't use that type of bandwidth on a monthly basis, right? Unless they were doing some significant uploading or maybe torrenting or something. But yeah, those costs are like unlikely to be breached, but they are there. So you need to be aware of them.
Yep. Okay, so again, Active Directory. With these enterprise machines, we need to domain join them. They need to have their DNS servers pointing to something that is going to resolve their domain name. So just one thing there, the Azure Virtual Network must route to a DNS server that can resolve the on-premise AD record. So it's just a matter of adding the custom DNS servers in Azure if you've got an on-prem DNS server so that it knows what it's domain joining to. Some required service URLs. So this is the stuff that I mentioned before. Now, this is sort of the phone home service so that it knows that, you know, hey, there's a machine available, and it allows the Windows 365 service to initiate things on behalf of the user, whether it's powering on, powering off, resetting the machine itself. So when you create a VNet for Windows 365, it's required to have outbound TCP access to the underlying services. So there's a full list in the Windows 365 documentation, but it's basically the standard URLs for Microsoft Intune, Azure Virtual Desktop URLs, and there's a bunch of Windows 365 URLs that it sort of needs outbound connectivity to. So just make sure they're not blocked in your firewall. Product SKUs and licenses. So as of today, this is what is available in Australia. They're the different SKUs that you can get on the left-hand side there. So you've got 1 CPU SKUs, 2 CPU SKUs with 4 gig of RAM. Then you've got 2 CPU with 8 gig of RAM, etc., etc. Just as a general idea, so anything with a 1 CPU is going to cost you anywhere between $34 and $40 per month per user, flat rate cost. So that is the VM running 24/7, always available for the user to go in and log in and use. When you start moving up to 2 CPUs, you're looking at $48 to $90 per user. The 4 CPU is $113 to $175 per month per user. And then the last one there at the bottom, anything with 8 CPU is roughly $210 to $275 per month, depending on, you know, your storage requirements. With these SKUs though, there is, you know, 128, 256 and 512 gigabyte variants. If you're using things like Microsoft OneDrive, you can probably get away with some of the lower end disk sizes. You don't necessarily need to have, you know, large disks unless you've got some sort of developers or something that are doing some, you know, like copying Git repos or whatever down locally to the device or running workloads. But generally speaking, you know, if you've got OneDrive on there, you don't really need to go that big of a hard drive. Also, there is support for GPU coming soon, from what I hear. It's not confirmed, but there should be something around, you know, some GPU support. So that's another I guess, thing that people have been asking for in Windows 365. It's available now in Azure Virtual Desktop. You can attach GPU machines to your virtual machines, but in Windows 365, the option's just not there at the moment.
So George, just back on that, not needing a large disk, because you don't think you need to cache much on these laptops, these cloud PCs. Is that because we can leverage the Microsoft backend and we've got like really good performance for Office 365 and places like that, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the VMs being, and the same applies to Azure Virtual Desktop, right? The VMs are being hosted in Azure. OneDrive and all that stuff is a sort of a Microsoft service. It'll use the Microsoft backplane to access those services as needed. It's super fast, so there's really no need to do any caching or anything like that. I mean, you can turn on, files on demand in OneDrive if you wanted to, sort of limit the amount of throughput and that kind of stuff, so that if you've got users that are resetting their devices or syncing large files, you can sort of control that. But yeah, I generally wouldn't really worry too much around caching anything.
And we'll put Outlook in maybe an online mode would be something to consider, because
absolutely,
it's just fast enough, right? You wouldn't notice it.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, definitely. Client features. So there's a couple of different ways that you can access the Windows 365. You've got the Windows desktop or the AVD client, the remote desktop client. You've also got the store client, Android, iOS, Mac OS, and then a web portal. So here are some of the things that each client can and can't do. Obviously, the Windows client is the most featured, and it will always have the latest features come to it first. Multimedia redirection is there currently for Azure Virtual Desktop. As of this slide deck, it says it's coming soon. I'm not sure if it's been released or not, but it's definitely something that will help, I guess, performance in the virtual machine world. So basically offloads a lot of the sort of the video rendering to the client device, and have the client device, do some of that on behalf of the VM. It's just an agent you have to install, but it's limited support at this time in terms of which websites have got that. But yeah,
we should expect quite a few announcements, I think, in enhancements and some new capabilities coming, because we have a Microsoft conference this month, right, where we'll almost certainly get some new features released.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you wondering which path should I take, whether I should get Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365. So here's just a really high level comparison between the two. So both support Windows 10, Windows 11, and Windows Server. Actually, that's an error that should not be green. Windows 365 does not support Windows Server. But then moving down the list, if you want to do multi-session, Azure Virtual Desktop definitely does multi-session. It does remote app streaming. It supports FSLogic's third-party support, so you can incorporate third-party solutions like VMware, Citrix, Nerdio. Nerdio have actually got a lot of integration with Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 as of recently, so they can also handle a lot of the licensing requirements and things like that in the background. So if a user leaves an organization and you remove that user from a group that's got Windows 365 licenses assigned to it, it'll actually go ahead and delete the VM and do some automation. So that should be a green tick on both sides. In terms of GPU support, Windows 365 does not support GPU. Azure Virtual Desktop does, but we're hoping that that's going to come soon. And I guess one of the key selling points down there at the bottom as well is the cost, right? So it's fixed rate cost per user for Windows 365, whereas AVD is consumption based. You can technically get a cheaper cost with AVD running personal VMs if you know your user is going to be using them for a set number of hours per week. But again, it's just an estimate, and you need to ensure that your users power off your VMs, or you have some sort of policy there to do that.
George, just on Windows 365 Cloud PC versus AVD,
yep.
Can you access an AVD environment from within your Cloud PC environment?
Can you access an AVD environment from within your cloud? Yeah, I think you could. I wouldn't see why not. Yeah, you can. Yep.
Why wouldn't you? I suppose once you've got that network connectivity, so if you needed to get to published applications done, then yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I couldn't imagine why you wouldn't be able to. Yeah.
Yep. Definitely.
Okay.
Cool. This is actually a really good breakdown from Nerdio that have come up with sort of this waterfall flow process or chart that gives you sort of a good indication around whether you should choose Windows 365 or Azure Virtual Desktop for your typical workloads. So, starting at the top there, is there less than 10 desktops or no current planned Azure footprint? If that's the case, then just go Windows 365. It's just easier to deploy. You don't need to go through all this hassle of deploying subscriptions, VNets, all this kind of stuff, right? If that's not the case, then is there little or no desktop virtualization experience, and are you already using Microsoft Endpoint Manager to administer physical desktops? If yes, again, go down the Windows 365 path. If no, do your end users require local admin rights and access to the desktop for more than 55 hours per week? Now, this is sort of the breaking point between the cost between Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop running the same SKU. If you're going more than 55 hours per week, then it's more beneficial to run Windows 365 full-time. Just leave the VM on. And just the thing to note, whether the VM's on or off in Windows 365, it is still a fixed rate. Whereas if you shut it down in Azure Virtual Desktop, that's where costing stops and you won't get charged for that. So if it's required more than 55 hours a week, do you need remote app streaming? If yes, then you can only do that in Azure Virtual Desktop. If no, then what is the quantity of virtual desktops needed to fluctuate throughout the month? Like do you need to save costs further by spinning up and spinning down VMs? Regardless which path we go from here, it's sort of pointing to the Azure Virtual Desktop because it is a lot more granular and flexible in terms of what we can do to manage the devices themselves. But generally speaking, I mean, if you're an organization that's got AVD already in place, Windows 365 might be a use case for some smaller workloads or a small subset of users. I've got a customer at the moment who wants to run Windows 365 because they have a bunch of users who are using personal desktops that would like to save costs by hibernating or snapshotting their VMs, and that's not possible in AVD. I mean, they technically can get moved to like a smaller SKU VM so that the costs are about the same or if not less than Windows 365. But they want that ability to sort of leave work on a Friday with documents open, come back on Monday and hope for those documents are still there. And in AVD to have that VM running, it's just more expensive. So they're looking at go down the Windows 365 path for that small subset of users.
I had a client as well, George, was speaking to last week that was a fairly small client. And believe it or not, they had an Excel add-in that they needed to run, and it took like a day or two to run these calculations, and they sort of chewed up their PC so they couldn't work. So they're literally looking for a second PC, and they didn't need all that published applications and AVD infrastructure to manage a small company. And it's back to that virtual desktop without the infrastructure, so they didn't have that overhead to look after and manage. They could just simply use Windows 365 and spin it up to do those calculations and make use of it that way. That was more cost effective for them, because it wasn't just the cost of running the VM itself, it's the cost of looking after it and having all that management that you get with or you need with AVD. So it's interesting on those smaller ends or smaller use cases where Windows 365 comes in. I think some of our enterprise clients as well have like external consultants where they just quickly need to give them access to their environment, and they need to do that in a secure and controlled way. And Windows 365 solves that sort of problem. They can quickly spin it up without them thinking about it too much.
Yeah, I've got another customer in chats at the moment where they're looking to use Windows 365 with Windows 11 to do some application testing. So that's another quick way of sort of assigning users access to a VM, and then it gives them the ability to reset their own machines if they want, and then copy applications up, run them, test them, etc., etc. So because you're offloading a lot of the management to the end user, it can be a really good idea to go down that route and sort of offload some of those tasks from your admin staff or your help desk.
Well, we know because we manage large Azure virtual desktop environments, right? That you've still got to plan, right? If you're going to increase, so if you've got external consultants or you need 50 desktops quickly, right, for a project or something like. these still, even though it's cloud-based and we have got that elasticity, still needs a little bit of thought and planning from our side. We've got to make sure that we've got enough storage available, etc. Whereas Windows 365, you can just throw it at them, right, and off you go, and use a corporate desktop. There you go, that you know is secure and is connected to your environment in an appropriate way.
Yep. Here's another good slide that I think really, at a high level, sort of identifies the differences between not only Windows Virtual Desktop and Azure Virtual Desktop, but also enterprise, business, and personal and pooled. So I might just pause here and give you guys a minute or two to have a read through some of those key differences between the two and see which ones are sort of applicable to which environment. I guess if you're using user profiles like FSLogix and you want to look at managing and maintaining that, that is not an option at the moment with Windows 365. It is with Azure Virtual Desktop, and it's also an optional thing if you want to go down the personal VM path around that. Typically with Azure Virtual Desktop personal VMs, because you are assigning a personal VM to each user that you assign, that VM is theirs for the life of their, however long they plan on keeping it, right? So there's really no need to offload that FSLogix profile elsewhere, because I assume you'd probably be backing up that virtual machine for the user. However, there might be times where, in a real sort of like a DR scenario, if region A was to go down and you're not using things like ASR or anything like that, and you want to sort of just bring up the profile for whatever reason, or bring up a VM and then attach a profile to them, you can use FSLogix and have that profile be synced between region A and region B if you need that sort of zero downtime capability, and having the storage itself replicating constantly. That's something that you can look at. For example, NetApp files do, I think it's 10 minute backup syncs every 10 minutes. The primary and the secondary are synced across. So if you do need your workloads to be up and running within a matter of minutes, you can look at something like that for personal desktops and FSLogix.
It's a great summary page, George, but I think what it highlights to me when I look at that is we really do need to think of Windows 365 as a PC, and not like we do with AVD, where it's probably more infrastructure, if that makes sense, right? In that we're sharing resources and IT are in more control, right? I think we do really need to think of it as a individual's PC, even though we don't have that physical hardware in front of us. Same concepts apply, right, when we're managing and looking after it.
Yep. Cool. Let's jump into some quick demos. So I've got my test tenant here where I've basically got two. Actually, let me start from the beginning. Let's go over to Azure Active Directory and let's take a look at sort of what licenses are assigned here. And then I'll go through the two differences. So I've got a Windows Enterprise, Windows 365 Enterprise license. It's got 128 gig of storage. And I've got a business one as well that's got 64 gig of storage. So they have both been assigned to my test user, Tony Stark. Over in the Intune portal, you go over to devices, provisioning Windows 365. So here, from this sort of top level, we can see sort of what's happening inside the environment, any errors, any failed provisioning, any machines that are in a grace period, basically meaning, the machine's been deleted and it's going to sit there for 7 days and then be deleted, sort of like a soft delete thing. When you unassign or remove a license from a user, I think they have 7 days to then go in and copy the data off if needed before it gets deleted, and you can extend it and all that kind of stuff. But starting over here from our provisioning policies. So I've got one provisioning policy here. It's basically what do we want to deploy to these machines? What are we doing with them, right? So we can just say policy 1. Do we want to Azure AD join it, or do we want to hybrid Azure AD join it? By the way, all of this that I'm talking about here only applies to the enterprise SKU. I'll show you the other one in a sec. So that's policy 1. We can do a hybrid Azure AD join. We can join it to my OMG WVD Life network. What image do we want to use? We can use a gallery image, so something that Microsoft patches and maintains on a monthly basis. If we want to do that, we can select, Windows 11, or we can go down the route of a custom image. I don't have any custom images to show you, but that's where you'd select that. And then from there, we can go over to the configuration. So what language do we want to give them? And also, how are we going to manage these PCs? We can turn on Windows Auto Patch, or we can use existing policies in Intune or SCCM or whatever to patch these machines on the monthly. Assignments is who do we want to assign this to? So you can obviously do a user or a group of users, depending on what you want to do, and then just next, finish. And that will apply that particular policy to a number of users. Custom images is obviously where we want to build our custom images. We can import them in here and see them and distribute them out. Azure Network Connection is where we would do the hybrid Azure AD join component of it. So here we can see I am domain join or hybrid Azure AD joining to my VNet, and this VNet has connectivity to my domain controller. The VNet itself has the appropriate DNS settings in place so that the machines, when that domain join, they know where the domain controller is. Under user settings, this is just as it says, what can our users do? So if we look at the policy that I've got here, I'm saying for any new users in this particular group that I've deployed it to, enable local admin for that user, allow the user to initiate a restore service, and I want to set a restore point in time for every 12 hours, right? So they have the ability to go back every 12 hours, 4 hours, whatever you set here, you can set that and apply it to the user, and then they can sort of reset the device in the background. Over on the portal, so this is the Windows 365.microsoft.com portal that your end users will typically go to. You can see I've got 2 cloud PCs here. Enterprise is the one that I was just showing you. Let me close out of that. Enterprise is the one I was just showing you. I'm going to open in the browser and log into that particular VM. Dom, here is your printer redirection stuff. So you got printer, clipboard, microphone, etc.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that's the same on the business one as well. That load. Oops. Remember this password. Nope. Give me a moment. On the window, there it is. So I'd logged in prior to this demo just to quickly make sure everything's good, but I've literally just deployed it. It took about 40 minutes to deploy this one here. And this is the enterprise SKU one. So I have this machine is domain joined. It's hybrid Azure AD joined. There's my domain. Whatever policies, GPO, etc. I have would apply to this machine here. And this is at a fixed rate. I mean, I've got ability, depending on what OU group policies, etc. you've got set, but I can shut it down, I can restart it, I can come over from the Windows 365 portal. I can see sort of what SKU I've got. If I had multiple enterprise versions, I can come in here and rename it to, developer, production, whatever. I've also got the ability to restart my machine. I can troubleshoot it, and then you can see some more information around sort of when you've last logged in, etc. So that's the enterprise SKU. Fixed rate. Now the Cloud PC business SKU, same thing, fixed rate. However, it doesn't have domain join or anything like that. It is literally a standalone machine. Think of it like a laptop. You give it to a staff member and off they go. There you go, printer, microphone, clipboard redirection, but you can't access on-prem resources. You can only access SaaS-based stuff. That password again. Log into this. There you go. So this one's Windows 11. 2-core, 4 gig of RAM. I think it had a 64 gig hard drive as well. Yep, there it is there. So that's pretty much my business PC. So it's just a machine in the cloud. Give it to your users and
So George, if we're thinking about administering those two and the differences, right? So with the enterprise one, obviously we've got custom images, so we can install the application, sit prep it, and have it ready to go on for any of the users, right? And then obviously as we're domain joined, all our group policies will apply, everything that we are used to, we can control where users go network-wise. So if you've got you need the use of proxy or sort of internet protection, we can leverage what we've already got in place on-prem, right? Or
Yep.
in our environment today. Obviously, when we flip over to the business one, we can't do those things. So the way we manage them has got to be very, you've got to think about that as really as a SaaS type approach, like we were saying before. So you would manage it via Intune, you deploy your applications via Intune, but they wouldn't be pre-installed, right? All those sort of things would be more like that. The modern management approach for them would be the sort of only option, whereas the enterprise SKU of Windows 365, we can manage the PC like we manage the one in front of us today, right, in our corporate environments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, look, I'd see most users going down the enterprise route because of the some of the more advanced features and things like that you can get out of it, and the fact that it is injected inside your VNet. I'll just show you guys a quick example of that. So under virtual machines, I've only got my domain controller running. You don't see any other VMs that are running. However, if I go over to network interfaces, we can see that that's it there, Cloud PC, Tony. So for Tony Stark, it's there. I see it as an object. It's attached to this VM that I have no access to, right? I don't see that anywhere. I can't do anything with it.
Because Microsoft managed that, right?
Correct. Yes.
And that's what we pay our fixed fee for. They look after that, right? And so what we do is that network connectivity. Of course, with that NIC injected into our environment, we can get to our line of business applications and all the other stuff we've been talking about, right? So it's just like a PC in our corporate environment.
Yep, absolutely. In terms of the management side of things, so this is the obviously the Intune portal where we can see what devices have been provisioned to which users. If anyone's interested, I mean, we've still got all of the same stuff that Intune provides us, device compliance, all of that stuff, depending on what we're pushing to the device. You can re-provision it, you can reassign it to another, you can place it under review. When you delete it, it goes into that grace period, so you have the ability to sort of give your users enough time to go in there and log off, like copy all their files off it, etc. It also has got information around monitoring metrics, that kind of stuff. So you can go into the reports tab and look through that. Mine's not going to have anything because I just provisioned it, but it does have all of those insights, monitoring metrics, things like that you can look at. And obviously, I am logging into this at the moment with the web browser, but the remote desktop client or the AVD agent as well gives you the full benefits of, I guess, the best user experience, right? So you do copy, paste files, folders, etc. It's got all the redirection, the Teams functionality. I could have been running this presentation in the Teams in the Windows 365 team client. However, the VM wasn't ready in time. But if it was, I probably would have just run the presentation from there just to show you that it is pretty solid in performance and all of that stuff. So yeah. Are there any questions around any of this from anyone?
Just been checking the chat, George. Nobody's asking any questions. I've got our regular Dom there, who's not too shy. He's asked a few. Anybody else got anything they would like to ask us? No?
Cool. I think we're a few minutes over, but I think that's pretty much it, guys. So I mean, hopefully that you've got a bit of an understanding now around the differences between the two versions of Windows 365, whether it's business or enterprise, and also some of the differences between Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. So as very similar as they are, we just need to understand that AVD, we have full control around that entire environment. We see everything, we can provision everything. Windows 365, we just sort of give like a baseline. Everything's done via Intune, SCCM. We have the NIC injection, and that's about it. We don't see the VMs themselves. We can't really sort of manage the disk itself or resize it or anything like that. It was sort of offloading that capability to the users and allowing our service desk to handle other tickets.
I think there's a lot of positives out of being able to sort of hand over that management and be a bit more agile for our business. We can, like a lot of SaaS products do today in the application land, this offering from Microsoft means that we can get a desktop up and running very, very quickly and just get out of the way. And what I really like about it, particularly with the enterprise SKU, with that injection of the NIC, is that we can manage that Cloud PC just the same way as we're managing every other laptop. So it's just one more asset in the environment, and it gives all that flexibility to either external users that maybe need access to our environment for a small amount of time, like auditors or maybe somebody coming in to do a review of some kind in your business, but also like people that just need to flip between things or need that extra compute. Like there's lots of different scenarios there, I think, where having a low overhead from an IT point of view and being able to pass that out to the user base is really powerful.
Yep.
But if just check one more last time before we say goodbye, if there's any questions. Hopefully that was useful for you all and you found it insightful. And we'll, of course, this is recorded and we'll circulate the presentation deck, and we're always here to answer questions if you've got any. So thank you very much for spending some time with us.